Greetings, esteemed viewers, and welcome to Taillingo, the channel dedicated to enhancing your English language proficiency through the art of storytelling. You'll learn English through story. Taillingo was created with the aim of making English learning both highly effective and enjoyable. If you're looking to reach the peak of English proficiency through entertaining stories and novels, don't forget to subscribe Taillingo and press bell icon. The King of the Golden Mountain. There was once a merchant who had only one child, a son, that was very young, and barely able to run alone. He had two richly laden ships then making a voyage upon the seas, in which he had embarked all his wealth, in the hope of making great gains, when the news came that both were lost. Thus from being a rich man he became all at once so very poor that nothing was left to him but one small plot of land, and there he often went in an evening to take his walk, and ease his mind of a little of his trouble. One day, as he was roaming along in a brown study, thinking with no great comfort on what he had been and what he now was, and was like to be, all on a sudden there stood before him a little, rough-looking, black dwarf. "Prithee, friend, why so sorrowful?" said he to the merchant. "What is it you take so deeply to heart?" "If you would do me any good I would willingly tell you," said the merchant. "Who knows but I may?" said the little man. "Tell me what ails you, and perhaps you will find I may be of some use." Then the merchant told him how all his wealth was gone to the bottom of the sea, and how he had nothing left but that little plot of land. "Oh, trouble not yourself about that," said the dwarf. "Only undertake to bring me here, 12 years hence, whatever meets you first on your going home, and I will give you as much as you please." The merchant thought this was no great thing to ask, that it would most likely be his dog or his cat, or something of that sort, but forgot his little boy Heinel, so he agreed to the bargain, and signed and sealed the bond to do what was asked of him. But as he drew near home, his little boy was so glad to see him that he crept behind him, and laid fast hold of his legs, and looked up in his face and laughed. Then the father started, trembling with fear and horror, and saw what it was that he had bound himself to do. But as no gold was come, he made himself easy by thinking that it was only a joke that the dwarf was playing him, and that, at any rate, when the money came, he should see the bearer, and would not take it in. About a month afterwards he went upstairs into a lumber room to look for some old iron, that he might sell it, and raise a little money, and there, instead of his iron, he saw a large pile of gold lying on the floor. At the sight of this he was overjoyed, and forgetting all about his son, went into trade again, and became a richer merchant than before. Meantime little Heinel grew up, and as the end of the 12 years drew near the merchant began to call to mind his bond, and became very sad and thoughtful, so that care and sorrow were written upon his face. The boy one day asked what was the matter, but his father would not tell for some time. At last, however, he said that he had, without knowing it, sold him for gold to a little, ugly-looking, black dwarf, and that the 12 years were coming round when he must keep his word. Then Heinel said, "Father, give yourself very little trouble about that. I shall be too much for the little man." When the time came, the father and son went out together to the place agreed upon, and the son drew a circle on the ground, and set himself and his father in the middle of it. The little black dwarf soon came, and walked round and round about the circle, but could not find any way to get into it, and he either could not, or dared not, jump over it. At last the boy said to him, "Have you anything to say to us, my friend, or what do you want?" Now Heinel had found a friend in a good fairy, that was fond of him, and had told him what to do, for this fairy knew what good luck was in store for him. "Have you brought me what you said you would?" said the dwarf to the merchant. The old man held his tongue, but Heinel said again, "What do you want here?" The dwarf said, "I come to talk with your father, not with you." "You have cheated and taken in my father," said the son. "Pray give him up his bond at once." "Fair and softly," said the little old man. "Right is right. I have paid my money, and your father has had it, and spent it, so be so good as to let me have what I paid it for." "You must have my consent to that first," said Heinel, "so please to step in here, and let us talk it over." The old man grinned, and showed his teeth, as if he should have been very glad to get into the circle if he could. Then at last, after a long talk, they came to terms. Heinel agreed that his father must give him up, and that so far the dwarf should have his way, but on the other hand, the fairy had told Heinel what fortune was in store for him, if he followed his own course, and he did not choose to be given up to his humpbacked friend, who seemed so anxious for his company. So, to make a sort of drawn battle of the matter, it was settled that Heinel should be put into an open boat that lay on the seashore hard by, that the father should push him off with his own hand, and that he should thus be set adrift, and left to the bad or good luck of wind and weather. Then he took leave of his father, and set himself in the boat, but before it got far off a wave struck it, and it fell with one side low in the water, so the merchant thought that poor Heinel was lost, and went home very sorrowful, while the dwarf went his way, thinking that at any rate he had had his revenge. The boat, however, did not sink, for the good fairy took care of her friend, and soon raised the boat up again, and it went safely on. The young man sat safe within, till at length it ran ashore upon an unknown land. As he jumped upon the shore he saw before him a beautiful castle, but empty and dreary within, for it was enchanted. Here, said he to himself, must I find the prize the good fairy told me of. So he once more searched the whole palace through, till at last he found a white snake, lying coiled up on a cushion in one of the chambers. Now the white snake was an enchanted princess, and she was very glad to see him, and said, Are you at last come to set me free? 12 long years have I waited here for the fairy to bring you hither as she promised, for you alone can save me. This night 12 men will come, their faces will be black, and they will be dressed in chain armor. They will ask what you do here, but give no answer, and let them do what they will, beat, whip, pinch, prick, or torment you, bear all. Only speak not a word, and at 12 o'clock they must go away. The second night 12 others will come, and the third night 24, who will even cut off your head, but at the 12th hour of that night their power is gone, and I shall be free, and will come and bring you the water of life, and will wash you with it, and bring you back to life and health. And all came to pass as she had said. Heinel bore all, and spoke not a word, and the third night the princess came, and fell on his neck and kissed him. Joy and gladness burst forth throughout the castle, the wedding was celebrated, and he was crowned king of the Golden Mountain. They lived together very happily, and the queen had a son. And thus 8 years had passed over their heads, when the king thought of his father, and he began to long to see him once again. But the queen was against his going, and said, I know well that misfortunes will come upon us if you go. However, he gave her no rest till she agreed. At his going away she gave him a wishing ring, and said, Take this ring, and put it on your finger. Whatever you wish it will bring you. Only promise never to make use of it to bring me hence to your father's house. Then he said he would do what she asked, and put the ring on his finger, and wished himself near the town where his father lived. Heinel found himself at the gates in a moment, but the guards would not let him go in, because he was so strangely clad. So he went up to a neighboring hill, where a shepherd dwelt, and borrowed his old frock, and thus passed unknown into the town. When he came to his father's house, he said he was his son, but the merchant would not believe him, and said he had had but one son, his poor Heinel, who he knew was long since dead, and as he was only dressed like a poor shepherd, he would not even give him anything to eat. The king, however, still vowed that he was his son, and said, Is there no mark by which you would know me if I am really your son? Yes, said his mother, our Heinel had a mark like a raspberry on his right arm. Then he showed them the mark, and they knew that what he had said was true. He next told them how he was king of the Golden Mountain, and was married to a princess, and had a son 7 years old. But the merchant said that can never be true. He must be a fine king truly who travels about in a shepherd's frock. At this the son was vexed, and forgetting his word, turned his ring, and wished for his queen and son. In an instant they stood before him, but the queen wept, and said he had broken his word, and bad luck would follow. He did all he could to soothe her, and she at last seemed to be appeased, but she was not so in truth, and was only thinking how she should punish him. One day he took her to walk with him out of the town, and showed her the spot where the boat was set adrift upon the wide waters. Then he sat himself down, and said, I am very much tired, sit by me, I will rest my head in your lap, and sleep a while. As soon as he had fallen asleep, however, she drew the ring from his finger, and crept softly away, and wished herself and her son at home in their kingdom. And when he awoke he found himself alone, and saw that the ring was gone from his finger. I can never go back to my father's house, said he, they would say I am a sorcerer. I will journey forth into the world, till I come again to my kingdom. So saying he set out and travelled till he came to a hill, where 3 giants were sharing their father's goods. And as they saw him pass they cried out, and said, Little men have sharp wits, he shall part the goods between us. Now there was a sword that cut off an enemy's head whenever the wearer gave the words, Heads off, a cloak that made the owner invisible, or gave him any form he pleased, and a pair of boots that carried the wearer wherever he wished. Heinel said they must first let him try these wonderful things, then he might know how to set a value upon them. Then they gave him the cloak, and he wished himself a fly, and in a moment he was a fly. The cloak is very well, said he, now give me the sword. No, said they, not unless you undertake not to say, Heads off! For if you do we are all dead men. So they gave it him, charging him to try it on a tree. He next asked for the boots also, and the moment he had all 3 in his power, he wished himself at the Golden Mountain, and there he was at once. So the giants were left behind with no goods to share or quarrel about. As Heinel came near his castle he heard the sound of merry music, and the people around told him that his queen was about to marry another husband. Then he threw his cloak around him, and passed through the castle hall, and placed himself by the side of the queen, where no one saw him. But when anything to eat was put upon her plate, he took it away and ate it himself, and when a glass of wine was handed to her, he took it and drank it, and thus, though they kept on giving her meat and drink, her plate and cup were always empty. Upon this, fear and remorse came over her, and she went into her chamber alone, and sat there weeping, and he followed her there. Alas, said she to herself, was I not once set free? Why then does this enchantment still seem to bind me? False and fickle one, said he. One indeed came who set thee free, and he is now near thee again. But how have you used him? Ought he to have had such treatment from thee? Then he went out and sent away the company, and said the wedding was at an end, for that he was come back to the kingdom. But the princes, peers, and great men mocked at him. However, he would enter into no parley with them, but only asked them if they would go in peace or not. Then they turned upon him and tried to seize him, but he drew his sword. Heads off, cried he, and with the word the traitors' heads fell before him, and Heinel was once more king of the Golden Mountain. The End. The Water of Life. Long before you or I were born, there reigned, in a country a great way off, a king who had 3 sons. This king once fell very ill, so ill that nobody thought he could live. His sons were very much grieved at their father's sickness, and as they were walking together very mournfully in the garden of the palace, a little old man met them and asked what was the matter. They told him that their father was very ill, and that they were afraid nothing could save him. I know what would, said the little old man, it is the water of life. If he could have a draught of it he would be well again, but it is very hard to get. Then the eldest son said, I will soon find it, and he went to the sick king, and begged that he might go in search of the water of life, as it was the only thing that could save him. No, said the king. I had rather die than place you in such great danger as you must meet with in your journey. But he begged so hard that the king let him go, and the prince thought to himself, if I bring my father this water, he will make me sole heir to his kingdom. Then he set out, and when he had gone on his way some time he came to a deep valley, overhung with rocks and woods, and as he looked around, he saw standing above him on one of the rocks a little ugly dwarf, with a sugar-loaf cap and a scarlet cloak, and the dwarf called to him and said, Prince, whither so fast? What is that to thee, you ugly imp? Said the prince haughtily, and rode on. But the dwarf was enraged at his behavior, and laid a fairy spell of ill luck upon him, so that as he rode on the mountain pass became narrower and narrower, and at last the way was so straitened that he could not go to step forward, and when he thought to have turned his horse round and go back the way he came, he heard a loud laugh ringing round him, and found that the path was closed behind him, so that he was shut in all round. He next tried to get off his horse and make his way on foot, but again the laugh rang in his ears, and he found himself unable to move a step, and thus he was forced to abide spellbound. Meantime the old king was lingering on in daily hope of his son's return, till at last the second son said, "Father, I will go in search of the water of life." For he thought to himself, "My brother is surely dead, and the kingdom will fall to me if I find the water." The king was at first very unwilling to let him go, but at last yielded to his wish. So he set out and followed the same road which his brother had done, and met with the same elf, who stopped him at the same spot in the mountains, saying, as before, "Prince, Prince, whither so fast?" "Mind your own affairs, busybody," said the prince scornfully, and rode on. But the dwarf put the same spell upon him as he put on his elder brother, and he, too, was at last obliged to take up his abode in the heart of the mountains. Thus it is with proud silly people, who think themselves above everyone else, and are too proud to ask or take advice. When the second prince had thus been gone a long time, the youngest son said he would go and search for the water of life, and trusted he should soon be able to make his father well again. So he set out, and the dwarf met him too at the same spot in the valley, among the mountains, and said, "Prince, whither so fast?" And the prince said, "I am going in search of the water of life, because my father is ill, and like to die. Can you help me? Pray be kind, and aid me if you can." "Do you know where it is to be found?" asked the dwarf. "No," said the prince, "I do not." "Pray tell me if you know." "Then as you have spoken to me kindly, and are wise enough to seek for advice, I will tell you how and where to go. The water you seek springs from a well in an enchanted castle, and that you may be able to reach it in safety, I will give you an iron wand and 2 little loaves of bread. Strike the iron door of the castle 3 times with the wand, and it will open. 2 hungry lions will be lying down inside gaping for their prey, but if you throw them the bread they will let you pass. Then hasten on to the well, and take some of the water of life before the clock strikes 12, for if you tarry longer the door will shut upon you forever." Then the prince thanked his little friend with the scarlet cloak for his friendly aid, and took the wand and the bread, and went traveling on and on, over sea and over land, till he came to his journey's end, and found everything to be as the dwarf had told him. The door flew open at the 3rd stroke of the wand, and when the lions were quieted he went on through the castle and came at length to a beautiful hall. Around it he saw several knights sitting in a trance. Then he pulled off their rings and put them on his own fingers. In another room he saw on a table a sword and a loaf of bread, which he also took. Further on he came to a room where a beautiful young lady sat upon a couch, and she welcomed him joyfully, and said if he would set her free from the spell that bound her, the kingdom should be his, if he would come back in a year and marry her. Then she told him that the well that held the water of life was in the palace gardens, and bade him make haste, and draw what he wanted before the clock struck 12. He walked on, and as he walked through beautiful gardens he came to a delightful shady spot in which stood a couch, and he thought to himself, as he felt tired, that he would rest himself for a while, and gaze on the lovely scenes around him. So he laid himself down, and sleep fell upon him unawares, so that he did not wake up till the clock was striking 1/4 to 12. Then he sprang from the couch dreadfully frightened, ran to the well, filled a cup that was standing by him full of water, and hastened to get away in time. Just as he was going out of the iron door it struck 12, and the door fell so quickly upon him that it snapped off a piece of his heel. When he found himself safe, he was overjoyed to think that he had got the water of life, and as he was going on his way homewards, he passed by the little dwarf, who, when he saw the sword and the loaf, said, "You have made a noble prize. With the sword you can at a blow slay whole armies, and the bread will never fail you." Then the prince thought to himself, I cannot go home to my father without my brothers. So he said, My dear friend, cannot you tell me where my two brothers are, who set out in search of the water of life before me, and never came back? I have shut them up by a charm between two mountains, said the dwarf, because they were proud and ill-behaved, and scorned to ask advice. The prince begged so hard for his brothers, that the dwarf at last set them free, though unwillingly, saying, Beware of them, for they have bad hearts. Their brother, however, was greatly rejoiced to see them, and told them all that had happened to him, how he had found the water of life, and had taken a cup full of it, and how he had set a beautiful princess free from a spell that bound her, and how she had engaged to wait a whole year, and then to marry him, and to give him the kingdom. Then they all three rode on together, and on their way home came to a country that was laid waste by war and a dreadful famine, so that it was feared all must die for want. But the prince gave the king of the land the bread, and all his kingdom ate of it. And he lent the king the wonderful sword, and he slew the enemy's army with it, and thus the kingdom was once more in peace and plenty. In the same manner he befriended two other countries through which they passed on their way. When they came to the sea, they got into a ship, and during their voyage the two eldest said to themselves, Our brother has got the water which we could not find, therefore our father will forsake us and give him the kingdom, which is our right. So they were full of envy and revenge, and agreed together how they could ruin him. Then they waited till he was fast asleep, and poured the water of life out of the cup, and took it for themselves, giving him bitter sea water instead. When they came to their journey's end, the youngest son brought his cup to the sick king, that he might drink and be healed. Scarcely, however, had he tasted the bitter sea water when he became worse even than he was before, and then both the elder sons came in, and blamed the youngest for what they had done, and said that he wanted to poison their father, but that they had found the water of life, and had brought it with them. He no sooner began to drink of what they brought him, than he felt his sickness leave him, and was as strong and well as in his younger days. Then they went to their brother, and laughed at him, and said, Well, brother, you found the water of life, did you? You have had the trouble, and we shall have the reward. Pray, with all your cleverness, why did not you manage to keep your eyes open? Next year one of us will take away your beautiful princess, if you do not take care. You had better say nothing about this to our father, for he does not believe a word you say, and if you tell tales, you shall lose your life into the bargain. But be quiet, and we will let you off. The old king was still very angry with his youngest son, and thought that he really meant to have taken away his life, so he called his court together, and asked what should be done, and all agreed that he ought to be put to death. The prince knew nothing of what was going on, till one day, when the king's chief huntsman went a-hunting with him, and they were alone in the wood together, the huntsman looked so sorrowful that the prince said, My friend, what is the matter with you? I cannot and dare not tell you, said he. But the prince begged very hard, and said, Only tell me what it is, and do not think I shall be angry, for I will forgive you. Alas, said the huntsman, the king has ordered me to shoot you. The prince started at this, and said, Let me live, and I will change dresses with you. You shall take my royal coat to show to my father, and do you give me your shabby one. With all my heart, said the huntsman. I am sure I shall be glad to save you, for I could not have shot you. Then he took the prince's coat, and gave him the shabby one, and went away through the wood. Some time after, 3 grand embassies came to the old king's court, with rich gifts of gold and precious stones for his youngest son. Now all these were sent from the 3 kings to whom he had lent his sword and loaf of bread, in order to rid them of their enemy and feed their people. This touched the old king's heart, and he thought his son might still be guiltless, and said to his court, Oh, that my son were still alive! How it grieves me that I had him killed! He is still alive, said the huntsman, and I am glad that I had pity on him, but let him go in peace, and brought home his royal coat. At this the king was overwhelmed with joy, and made it known throughout all his kingdom, that if his son would come back to his court he would forgive him. Meanwhile the princess was eagerly waiting till her deliverer should come back, and had a road made leading up to her palace all of shining gold, and told her courtiers that whoever came on horseback, and rode straight up to the gate upon it, was her true lover, and that they must let him in. But whoever rode on one side of it, they must be sure was not the right one, and that they must send him away at once. The time soon came, when the eldest brother thought that he would make haste to go to the princess, and say that he was the one who had set her free, and that he should have her for his wife, and the kingdom with her. As he came before the palace and saw the golden road, he stopped to look at it, and he thought to himself, "It is a pity to ride upon this beautiful road," so he turned aside and rode on the right-hand side of it. But when he came to the gate, the guards, who had seen the road he took, said to him, he could not be what he said he was, and must go about his business. The second prince set out soon afterwards on the same errand, and when he came to the golden road, and his horse had set one foot upon it, he stopped to look at it, and thought it very beautiful, and said to himself, "What a pity it is that anything should tread here." Then he too turned aside and rode on the left side of it. But when he came to the gate, the guards said he was not the true prince, and that he too must go away about his business, and away he went. Now when the full year was come round, the third brother left the forest in which he had lain hid for fear of his father's anger, and set out in search of his betrothed bride. So he journeyed on, thinking of her all the way, and rode so quickly that he did not even see what the road was made of, but went with his horse straight over it, and as he came to the gate it flew open, and the princess welcomed him with joy, and said he was her deliverer, and should now be her husband and lord of the kingdom. When the first joy at their meeting was over, the princess told him she had heard of his father having forgiven him, and of his wish to have him home again. So, before his wedding with the princess, he went to visit his father, taking her with him. Then he told him everything, how his brothers had cheated and robbed him, and yet that he had borne all those wrongs for the love of his father. And the old king was very angry, and wanted to punish his wicked sons, but they made their escape, and got into a ship and sailed away over the wide sea, and where they went to nobody knew and nobody cared. And now the old king gathered together his court, and asked all his kingdom to come and celebrate the wedding of his son and the princess. And young and old, noble and squire, gentle and simple, came at once on the summons, and among the rest came the friendly dwarf, with the sugar-loaf hat, and a new scarlet cloak. And the wedding was held, and the merry bells rung. And all the good people they danced and they sung, and feasted and frolicked I can't tell how long. The end. Dr. KNOWALL. There was once upon a time a poor peasant called Crab, who drove with 2 oxen a load of wood to the town, and sold it to a doctor for $2. When the money was being counted out to him, it so happened that the doctor was sitting at table, and when the peasant saw how well he ate and drank, his heart desired what he saw, and would willingly have been a doctor too. So he remained standing a while, and at length inquired if he too could not be a doctor. "Oh, yes," said the doctor, "that is soon managed." "What must I do?" asked the peasant. "In the first place, buy yourself an ABC book of the kind which has a cock on the frontispiece. In the second, turn your cart and your 2 oxen into money, and get yourself some clothes, and whatsoever else pertains to medicine. Thirdly, have a sign painted for yourself with the words, 'I am Dr. KNOWALL,' and have that nailed up above your house door." The peasant did everything that he had been told to do. When he had doctored people a while, but not long, a rich and great lord had some money stolen. Then he was told about Dr. KNOWALL, who lived in such and such a village, and must know what had become of the money. So the lord had the horses harnessed to his carriage, drove out to the village, and asked Crab if he were Dr. KNOWALL. Yes, he was, he said. Then he was to go with him and bring back the stolen money. Oh, yes, but Greta, my wife, must go too. The lord was willing, and let both of them have a seat in the carriage, and they all drove away together. When they came to the nobleman's castle, the table was spread, and Crab was told to sit down and eat. "Yes, but my wife, Greta, too," said he, and he seated himself with her at the table. And when the first servant came with a dish of delicate fare, the peasant nudged his wife, and said, "Greta, that was the first," meaning that was the servant who brought the first dish. The servant, however, thought he intended by that to say, "That is the first thief," and as he actually was so, he was terrified, and said to his comrade outside, "The doctor knows all, we shall fare ill, he said I was the first." The second did not want to go in at all, but was forced. So when he went in with his dish, the peasant nudged his wife, and said, "Greta, that is the second." This servant was equally alarmed, and he got out as fast as he could. The third fared no better, for the peasant again said, "Greta, that is the third." The fourth had to carry in a dish that was covered, and the Lord told the doctor that he was to show his skill, and guess what was beneath the cover. Actually, there were crabs. The doctor looked at the dish, had no idea what to say, and cried, "Ah, poor crab." When the Lord heard that, he cried, "There! He knows it. He must also know who has the money." On this the servants looked terribly uneasy, and made a sign to the doctor that they wished him to step outside for a moment. When therefore he went out, all four of them confessed to him that they had stolen the money, and said that they would willingly restore it, and give him a heavy sum into the bargain, if he would not denounce them, for if he did they would be hanged. They led him to the spot where the money was concealed. With this the doctor was satisfied, and returned to the hall, sat down to the table, and said, "My lord, now will I search in my book where the gold is hidden." The fifth servant, however, crept into the stove to hear if the doctor knew still more. But the doctor sat still and opened his ABC book, turned the pages backwards and forwards, and looked for the cock. As he could not find it immediately, he said, "I know you are there, so you had better come out." Then the fellow in the stove thought that the doctor meant him, and full of terror, sprang out, crying, "That man knows everything." Then Dr. Knowall showed the Lord where the money was, but did not say who had stolen it, and received from both sides much money in reward, and became a renowned man. The end. And there you have it, folks. We've reached the end of this incredible story together, but the adventure doesn't stop here. We have a variety of story videos like this one available for your enjoyment. To watch more, just click here. If you've enjoyed this story and want more mind-blowing stories, be sure to smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next epic upload. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.